We're here because free speech is under attack. We're here because people are being convinced that socialism works. We're here because people are being judged guilty until proven innocent. We are fighting back with facts. This is not a safe zone, so buckle up, Buttercup. This is the raw, naked truth.
Debt ceiling talks, the Washington Post calls out Biden's deficit lies, and more. Welcome to the Raw Naked Truth. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin, and here's the news you need to know. The Washington Post's chief fact-checker, Glenn Kessler, awarded President Biden with a bottomless Pinocchio rating for repeatedly touting what the reporter described as a highly misleading claim about reducing the deficit. Earlier this week, Biden told a group of union workers that in his first 2 years in office, he lowered the deficit by a record $1.7 trillion, a claim Kessler gave 3 Pinocchios in September. Yet he keeps saying it over and over, Kessler wrote. By our count, at least 30 times since June, he's taken credit for reducing the budget deficit by $1.7 trillion. Kessler, who previously gave Biden his first bottomless Pinocchio rating in November for claiming many times without evidence that he had traveled 17,000 miles with Chinese President Xi Jinping, explained the $1.7 trillion figure came from comparing fiscal year 2022's $1.375 trillion deficit to fiscal year 2020's $3.132 trillion deficit. The so-called reduction is a result to the end of one-time COVID spending. Democratic New York City Mayor Eric Adams claimed Monday that Republican Texas Governor Greg Abbott targets black-run cities with migrant buses. This weekend, we learned that Governor Abbott is once again deciding to play politics with people's lives by resuming the busing of asylum seekers to New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Denver, and Washington, D.C., Adams said on Twitter Monday afternoon. Not only is this behavior morally bankrupt and devoid of any concern for the well-being of asylum seekers, but it is also impossible to ignore the fact that Abbott is now targeting 5 cities run by black mayors. Put plainly, Abbott is using this crisis to hurt black-run cities. In fact, the migrants are being sent to sanctuary cities that pledge to accept illegal immigrants. The number of migrants being sent to these sanctuary cities is less than 10% of the migrant surge that Texas is dealing with. Adams is playing politics with the idea because he was completely silent when President Biden flew migrants to these cities. The United Nations warned Monday that Sudan is approaching a humanitarian breaking point as foreign governments, including the United States, complete emergency evacuations ahead of the completion of a ceasefire that both of the country's warring factions have repeatedly violated. The army and the rival paramilitary rapid support forces, which have been fighting for control of the Northeast African nation since April 15th, agreed on Sunday to extend the truce by 72 hours. On Monday, airstrikes and anti-aircraft continued in Khartoum. We saw dead bodies, an industrial area that was all looted. We saw people carrying TVs on their backs and big sacks looted from factories, said Mohammed Esseddin, who returned after fleeing the Sudanese capital. He said the flood of refugees drove up prices for necessities in safer areas. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen wrote in a letter to Congress Monday that the government might not be able to meet all of its obligations potentially as early as June 1st, unless Congress takes action. President Biden on Monday called House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, and Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell to meet with him in the White House on May 9th to discuss raising the debt ceiling to prevent a potentially catastrophic default on federal debt. House Republicans passed a bill offering to raise the debt ceiling in exchange for deep spending cuts, but Biden and leaders in the Democratic-controlled Senate said there should be no conditions. Biden has previously said he would not negotiate on the debt limit. The Democrats are insisting that despite the fact that the debt limit is the equivalent of a maxed out credit card, rather than cutting spending to find money to pay that credit card, they would rather just take out new credit cards. Say goodbye to new episodes of your favorite television shows for a bit. The Writers Guild of America called on its members to launch Hollywood's first strike in 15 years starting Tuesday, potentially halting film and TV production. The union's board members voted unanimously to call the strike to demand higher pay and a bigger share of streaming revenue from studios such as Disney and Netflix. Thousands of union members are expected to picket in Los Angeles, New York, and other cities after last-minute talks failed to produce a deal with studios on a new 3-year contract. The old one expired at midnight. The WG accused studios of creating a gig economy inside a union workforce and devaluing the profession of writing. The Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers said it offered generous pay increases and improvements in streaming residuals. Gordon Lightfoot, the folk singer-songwriter who achieved icon status in his native Canada and scored a string of pop hits in the U.S. in the late 1960s and 70s, died Monday night in Toronto, his spokeswoman Victoria Lord said. He was 84 years old. His death was attributed to natural causes. Lightfoot was already a well-regarded singer-songwriter in Canada and folk circles when he switched labels to Reprise Records in 1968. His 1970 debut record on Reprise contained his first U.S. hit, If You Could Read My Mind. He reached the top of the American adult contemporary charts in the mid-1970s with Sundown, Carefree Highway, Rainy Day People, and The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Sundown also hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart in 1974. That's the Raw Naked Truth. You can catch every episode of The Raw Naked Truth at xvadio.com/podcasts, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Audible, and other platforms that respect freedom of speech. We'll see you next time.